Get down. Hey, what's up, everybody? It is your old pal, Brian Keene, checking in here with you for another patron live stream. Sorry that I am distracted. My cat, Dallas, named after Dallas Mayer, of course, real name of author Jack Ketchum, has decided that right now is when he wants to play fetch. He plays fetch like a dog, and right now is when he wants to do it while Daddy's busy. So you go. Here, I'm going to throw it one time for you, and that's it. So anyway, welcome to the live stream. While we wait for people to come in, normally this is the part of the show where I show off cool things from my library. However, you may have noticed I am once again broadcasting from the kitchen. If you read my newsletter, my weekly newsletter on Substack, then you know that is because we are currently fostering 8 kittens. Actually, as of tonight, it's only 7 kittens. Come Tuesday morning, it will be 0 kittens. But I cannot live stream upstairs, and therefore I can't really go through the library and find cool things to show you because I will be besieged by kittens. So I'll show you what's right here on the kitchen table. We have brand new, hot off the presses, La Casa del Diablo. It's a weird Western by John Urbancic. This just came out this week. John and I had a little something to do today, so he brought it over to me. There it is, signed by him. Very much looking forward to this. John is one of my best friends, but he is also one of my favorite writers in this genre. I have talked about this before. I think that John, of anybody of my generation of writers, I think John is the one that has never gotten the credit he deserves. Jay Wilburn on Lit Reactor called John the greatest living horror short story writer, and I agree with that assessment. I don't think it's hyperbole. So yeah, anytime John puts something new out, I'm looking forward to it, and this weird Western especially. I see folks coming in, so while we're doing that, some other cool things here on the kitchen table. John and I went to the comic book store today, picked up Crisis on Infinite Earths, issue 1, first issue. Korak, Son of Tarzan, issue 49. And as you can see, some of these are beat to hell, and some of them are in decent shape. And a good run of Marvel's Cole. Cole, of course, being one of Robert E. Howard's characters. I picked up issues 16 through 29, the last issue. So there you have it. Some cool things. Those Cole books especially, man. I loved those when I was a kid. I read those and Conan both voraciously. Dallas, I'm going to throw it one more time, and then we have to start answering people's questions. He likes chasing these caps off Deer Park water bottles. Okay, so if you're new, I know we picked up a lot of new patron subscribers this month. Here's how it works. You ask the questions on Patreon. You're the only one that gets to ask the questions. I then answer them. This stream right now is only available for patron viewers to watch live, usually within 3 or 4 weeks after it is aired. I then make it public so that everybody can watch it and enjoy the answers. So let's see here. We go to Teddy. Teddy says, thanks for taking the time to do a live stream. Last week, I read your writing advice, and it stuck in my head for a couple of reasons. My question to you is, how do you persevere through knowing the pitfalls of publishing? Well, there are a lot of pitfalls of publishing, Teddy, and I'm here to tell you, even if you're a self-publisher, there are still pitfalls. A lot of people are having trouble with Amazon and KDP right now. A lot of self-publishers and indie presses. There are always going to be pitfalls in publishing. There have always been pitfalls in publishing. Dallas, I refuse to pick that up and throw it. There were pitfalls in publishing during the pulp era, the Weird Tales era. If you've ever read the letters and correspondence that Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard and E. Huffman Price and Clark Ashton Smith and Robert Bloch and all these others wrote to each other, they were dealing with the same stuff. Edgar Allan Poe was dealing with the same stuff. There's a famous letter where Edgar Allan Poe is arguing that 3 cents a word is not a professional rate for a writer, but that was the professional rate at the time. Should be noted, 3 cents a word continued to be the professional rate up through the late 90s. So writers have always had to deal with this crap. How do you persevere through that? I think it can be answered not by me, but by my dear departed friend Tom Piccirilli. Tom once said, if you were stranded on a desert island and you wrote stories in the sand with a stick, then you are meant to be a writer. I think that's it. Even if tomorrow I got done with all this bullshit and I said, fuck it, I'm going to go become a forest ranger, or I'm going to go become a tugboat captain, or I'm going to, sit around and read comic books all day and become some mad hermit living in a trailer in the woods with 50 cats, which, I'm not far off from. I would still write. I've been writing since I was 8 years old. I was writing since the first 2 comic books I picked up. I was 8, and I went to the newsstand with my father. I remember, we got in his truck and we went to the newsstand, and he bought a hunting magazine and a pouch of chewing tobacco, and he bought me 2 comic books, which were 25 cents each at the time. Captain America and the Falcon, and the other one was The Defenders. And I read them when we got home. I immediately read them again. I got yelled at to stop reading them at the dinner table, so I put them down. When dinner was over, I went back and read them a 3rd time and got out the dictionary and started looking up the words that I didn't know. And on that 3rd reread, I noticed, the little box. Let me find you a 70s comic book here. Hang on. Let me go back to the camera because I'm actually looking at the Patreon page right now. I don't know how well you can see it, but right here. Now, usually in Marvel Comics, it was down here at the bottom of the page, but it would list the creator credits, and I remember being 8 years old and looking at that, and it said written by, and it occurred to me, somebody, some grown-up got paid to do this, to tell this wonderful story. Specifically, it was that issue of The Defenders. Steve Gerber was the writer, and I knew right then and there, I want to do this. So I have always written. I have ton of unpublished short stories, some unfinished short stories. I have several unpublished novels. They will never be published because they're not meant to be published. I've put a few fragments and such in a now out of print collection called Apocrypha, but the public will never see these because they're not meant to be published. They're badly written. Every author has to do that. You have to write a bunch of bad crap until you get good. But my point is, I've always written. Long before I was getting published, I would write. And that's how I persevere. If tomorrow they came to me and they said, you can't do this anymore, you're canceled because, you're Brian Keene, which seems like a good enough reason to cancel somebody, I would still write. I wouldn't let people see it. I would go back to just not publishing it. That's how I persevere. I persevere because I love this art form. I love the creativity. I love the self-expression, and I love this genre. I'm delighted that I am allowed to continue contributing to it. So I hope that answers your question. It's a good question. Joanne, welcome, Joanne. Joanne asks, Levi Stoltzfus is perhaps the most Pennsylvanian of names to ever come out of the Keystone State. Using it immediately tells me where the story is set, or at least the origins of the character, if things aren't going down in PA. Excuse me. That leads me to ask, what kind of process do you go through when thinking up character names? That is a great question. Living here in PA, and I live literally on the border with Amish country. I live in York County. Amish country is Lancaster County. The border between those two things is the Susquehanna River, and I live right on the bank of the Susquehanna River. We have Amish here in York County as well. In fact, we have a lovely Amish family, live only a few houses down the road from Mary and I here. Great people. I've known Amish and Mennonites all my life. In fact, when I was in middle school, I had the biggest crush on a Mennonite girl. She didn't go to Mennonite school. She actually went to public school with us. And yeah, I had the biggest crush on her. I don't know where she is today. Probably not watching this live stream, but um, I knew a lot of Amish folks, and Levi Stoltzfus is a very common name in that community. There are many, many, many Levi Stoltzfuses. It's like Jim Smith, you know. So I kind of wanted that because with Levi, you have this old school occult detective character, but we also play with him being in the modern world. Uh, those of you on Patreon who have read the Invisible Monsters first draft, it opens with Levi on an airplane going through his phone. He's playing Words with Friends on his phone, but he's using it in magic, or in the previous novel, Last of the Albert Witches, where he has spell books on his Kindle rather than these old crumbling tomes, sitting on the shelf. So one of the things we do in magic, names are power, of course. And there's always the old trope in occult detective fiction where you don't really know a character's real name, because knowing their real name will give you power over them. The reader assumes his real name is Levi Stoltzfus, because that's what I've always told you, and that's what he's always told people. But if you look what he tells people, and you can go back, you can start with Ghost Walk and work your way through all the short stories and all the books. He never says, my name is Levi Stoltzfus. He says, you may call me Levi Stoltzfus, or he says, I'm called Levi Stoltzfus. I'm not going to tell you whether it's his real name or not. I want it to remain mysterious. But if he was using a pseudonym, it's like walking up and saying, "Hi, I'm John Smith," or "I'm Bob Smith." It's a very common name for that community. But as for the process, when I think up character names, it depends. Early in my career, I was known for doing cameos of my peers, and that's common. A lot of writers do that, but I went overboard. If you look at the Rising and City of the Dead, I mean, the Rising, it's everybody from Dawn of the Dead is a character if you look at the names, and folks like David Scow and others that I thought had contributed to the genre, John Skip, Phil Nutman. It basically was me paying homage to all those people. City of the Dead is filled with my friends' names. And what I learned early on is, while the public doesn't see that, those friends do, and it takes them out. It stops their enjoyment. And I've had that happen too, where people have used me in a novel, or named a character after me. And it jolts me out of the reading experience for a second. So I try not to do that much anymore. But, I'll come up with stuff, whatever feels natural, or, I might look around my office and, when we're doing these back upstairs again, I'll be able to show you. Like I've got stuff from my career all over every inch of the wall in my office, including, banners from conventions where I've been a guest of honor. And some of them are these big comic book conventions where there's like 50 guests of honor on the banner, and I'll look and I'll take the first name of a cosplayer and the last name of an actor that are on the banner, and I'll round them together, and boom, that's the character's name. But all kinds of ways I come up with them. The only thing I try to do, Mary, what's that called when the character's first and last name begins with the same letter? Alliteration. This is why you should date a professor if you're a writer. And if you're a writer like me, who barely graduated high school, you date a professor. I try to avoid alliteration, like Peter Parker or Henry Hill. I've done it on occasion if the name just really had a ring to it, but I try to avoid that. And the other thing, I guess, depends on where the novel is set. A lot of my stuff is here in Pennsylvania. I try to use authentic Pennsylvanian names, particularly last names, Smeltzer, Stoltzfus, Kellenberger, names that you are common here. Same thing if the book is set in West Virginia, like the Earthworm Gods books, or Gathering of Crows and Darkness on the Edge of Town set in Virginia. I try to use surnames that are popular in those areas. All right, let's go on. Next question is, given that Amazon is decommissioning certain KDP accounts that they deem unacceptable, an example being that of Planet Bizarro, they essentially are putting them out of business. How will this change the landscape for indie and self-publishers? We just mentioned that earlier, didn't we? We're talking about all the trouble with Amazon right now. First of all, let's talk about what's going on with Amazon, because it's a number of different things, okay? They combined KDP and CreateSpace. Now, for you readers, I'm going to try to not get too inside baseball, but CreateSpace was a self-publishing platform. KDP was a self-publishing platform. Amazon finally folded them in under the same umbrella, and there have been a lot of glitches, and they weren't all apparent at the start. I myself experienced a glitch over the last couple weeks where books of mine that I had published through KDP should be available to Barnes & Noble, to Waterstones, to Books A Million, etc. And they were coming up as unavailable in their systems. Even though in my KDB dashboard, I had clicked expanded distribution. When I went to check, it said these books were no longer eligible for expanded distribution, that I had broken some vague rule of Amazon's. I knew that wasn't the case. And I had to end up messaging Amazon, and you never know if you're going to get a real person or you're going to get the AI, but I got a real person and explained, and then they looked and they said, yeah, obviously this is an error. Their tech team handled it in like 2 days for me and got it fixed. But I know other authors who are running into this and did not get that same sort of quick response. Mary is fond of complaining to our friends, and she's an earshot. She can come in here and smack me if I'm speaking out of turn. She's fond of complaining to our friends that I get special treatment from KDP. I don't like to think that I do, but I guess I do. I guess there is some benefit to being Brian Keene. My shit got taken care of quick. I know other authors who have not been that lucky. So that's one thing going on, but that is a glitch that has been caused by folding CreateSpace and KDP's systems together. There are other things going on. Pricing has been very weird. You may set the price of your paperback at $12.99 in your KDB dashboard, and suddenly it's being listed on Amazon as $59.99. But when you go and look in your dashboard, it's still listed as $12.99. It's a glitch. It's not Amazon doing something on purpose. It's a glitch, and they are, for whatever reason, right now playing whack-a-mole with glitches. Which brings me to the example you cite with Planet Bizarro. Now, if you read my newsletter, you read my tweets, you know I'm very fond of using the metaphor that these days I live on Mars, Manhattan on Mars. I'm not involved in any of this stuff anymore. And there's a lot of truth to that, because I did not know about this situation until you asked the question. And I went and I looked this afternoon so that I could, be informed and answer your question. If I'm understanding everything correctly, what happened with Planet Bizarro is KDP decommissioned their account for a book that they published, okay? But the book that they cite in their email to Planet Bizarro is not a book that Planet Bizarro published. It's a completely different book by a completely different publisher, okay? That is clearly an error, clearly a glitch. Amazon should rectify that. Now, I was reading some of the exchanges that Planet Bizarro was I don't want to say allegedly in a like I'm trying to imply something. I'm saying alleged because I'm not involved in this situation. I just quickly read some screen caps and some photos, so I don't have all the details. But in the back and forth, it sounds to me like at first Planet Bizarro may have been arguing with the AI. They do occasionally use AI for some of their first round of customer service. But if you escalate, you can get a real person. So I would think this is an easily rectifiable situation once Planet Bizarro talks to the right person. But then in researching this more, I found out this seems to be happening to a lot of authors. Some of them deservedly so. They are clearly breaking the rules. They are writing, you know, Fortnite stories, or they are doing coloring books that include the Marvel superheroes, copyrighted, trademarked images. That's a no-no. You can't do that. But in other cases, like Planet Bizarro, it's clearly a glitch. But yeah, it's frustrating. You know, if you go back to Teddy's original question, the pitfalls of publishing, if you're getting screwed by traditional publishing, your only two other, safe harbors are indie publishing or self-publishing, both of which are mostly reliant on KDP. Now there are other places you can use, Lightning Source, B&N Press, etc. But a vast majority of this generation are using KDP, which I've always said is a mistake. Manhattan on Mars, not just using KDP. We're using all the platforms. To avoid situations like this. When what I talked about happened with me, I wasn't that worried about it. I wanted Amazon to fix it, but I wasn't that worried because I knew that even if their expanded distribution wasn't getting the books to Barnes and Noble, Waterstones, etc., I would be able to work around that and still make it happen. I'm a big believer in never put all your eggs in one basket, and that includes the delivery method, and that includes your publication method. If you are in 2022, if you are an indie publisher or you are self-publishing and you are strictly relying on KDP, you are doing it wrong. If you're strictly relying on Barnes and Noble Press, you are doing it wrong. You need to utilize all these platforms. I know there are authors who will put it up on KDP, use KDP's expanded distribution, and that's the end of it. I know there are some who will use Ingram and allow Ingram to farm it to Kindle, farm it to Nook, farm it to Kobo. I do it directly, and you should too. Log into KDP, use your Kindle. If you're using them for trade paperback, use it there. Then log into Nook, directly upload it to Nook yourself, Kobo yourself, Apple yourself. If you're going to self-publish, then you are the publisher, and you need to do all the things a good, smart, sensible publisher who knows that this landscape is constantly going to change would do. So end of sermon. Next question. How does horror continue in the modern setting? Keeping the supernatural, for instance, as a secret, so to speak, would seem to be an ever-increasing challenge with surveillance in a near constant state. Ghosts, monsters, haunted houses, all these things seem as though they stay hidden much longer in this technological era. I think it's always continued in a modern setting. This is our modern setting, but if you look at let's go back to the 70s when Stephen King and others start to get popular. Horror before then, in the pulps up through the 60s, it's a lot of the Gothic trappings, the crumbling castles and estates in England, etc. And then, here comes Stephen King and others like him, and they're setting it in small town America. Salem's Lot is a novel about the death of small town America. Excuse me a moment. That's a backfiring motorcycle rolling past, not gunfire. But that was a modern setting for the time. At one time where the pulps were taking place, that was a modern setting. And you keep going back. If you go back to the original cave paintings on the walls done by our ancestors, many of those were horror fiction. I will go to my grave arguing horror is the original genre. And I point to the cave paintings because so many of those depict what they were afraid of. They were afraid of the moon and sun cycle. They were afraid of the saber-toothed tiger in the cave next door. They were afraid of thunder and all these things they didn't yet understand. And they depicted that, not yet with words, but with pictographs, which is an early form of writing. So there was an early Brian Keene in that cave, visualizing what thunder must be and etching it on that cave wall. So I think horror has always addressed the modern setting, and I think it continues to do so. And I think all those old staples of the genre, I think they still have value. Um, and I'm not, when I say staples of genre, I'm not talking about brands. I'm not talking about intellectual property. I don't think the Halloween franchise or Friday the 13th or Aliens or Predator, I don't think they have the value they once had. We didn't need another Halloween movie. And the only reason they made another Halloween movie is because they want to keep that brand active. A corporation wants to keep making money from it. I would much rather see something new and different done with slashers than see Michael Myers for the 8th or 9th time. But I do believe that Mary's Alien novel has merit and worth and value. I should say that because I could hear her in there stewing. Did you just trash the Alien franchise right before my novel comes out? I'm sick to death of branding. If you want to make another zombie movie or write a zombie novel, great. But does it have to be another remake of Dawn of the Dead? How soon before they're remaking 28 Days Later? How soon before they're remaking Train to Busan? Actually, they're already making it. They're making it for an American audience. Ghosts, zombies, monsters, haunted houses, these all have value. We have been using those for centuries in this genre. It's just how you adapt them to a modern setting. I'll give you a great example. The Perfectly Fine House by Stephen Kazanowski and Wiley Young. If I was up in my office, I'd go grab a copy and show you on screen. The Perfectly Fine House is a fantastic example of how to take the haunted house tropes and adapt them to our modern world, our world of, smartphones and smart homes, where, we can watch an ISIS snuff film on YouTube. So why should a ghost scare us? It's a really smart, clever, and excellent novel that plays with exactly what you're talking about. So yeah, I think that's our job. Our job is to, how does horror continue in the modern setting? Well, it doesn't if we don't do our jobs. But we're lucky enough as fans to live in a time when there are more people doing that job amazingly than ever before. I was doing the math the other day for something I'm writing, and if I'm correct, now math is not my strong suit, but if I'm correct, there are more working horror writers now, and by working I mean professionally published, than there were at the height of the pulps and the height of the horror paperback craze of the 1980s up through the early 90s. That's very healthy. Of course, as we've talked about a couple times tonight, this industry fluctuates. This industry is always in a constant state of flux. And that will change again, but for now, man, it's a great time to be a horror fiction fan. Next question is from Austin. Let me scroll down here. Austin says, I hate to admit it, but I'm a fairly new fan. Well, there's nothing to be ashamed of in that, Austin. I'm spending October to only read books from your catalog has truly been the best treat this season. Well, I can't argue with that. Props to you. Thank you for doing that. I recently finished all 4 books from your Awesome Rising series, although I can't get enough of Jim, Danny, Frankie, and Martin's world. A part of me is surprised that you're working on The Fall. What inspired you to return to this world? Apologies in advance if you've answered this question before. That's a good question. So it begins with a novel called Clickers versus Zombies, which is not part of the Rising series, and yet it is. Clickers versus Zombies, it was the 3rd Clickers book that J.F. Gonzalez and I had written together. It was actually the 4th book in the series, but 3rd one he and I had written together. And it was his idea. He said, what if we took the world of the Rising and the world of Clickers and we mashed them together? And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, our stuff exists in the shared universe, right? I'm like, yes. And he goes, and we've established that our shared universe, there are alternate realities. And I'm like, yes. And this is back before Marvel and DC and everybody else was putting this on the screen. This was still kind of a cool idea to people. Now it's old and boring, and that pisses me off. But back then it was cool. So he's like, so what if there's a world where the rising happens at the same time Clickers happens? And I'm like, that could be a lot of fun to write. So in writing it, we not only used alternate reality versions of the Clickers characters, we used alternate reality versions of some of the rising characters, primarily Jim and Danny. In that world, Jim and his ex-wife still get along. They co-parent together. Danny is a happy, healthy little kid. It's a very different Jim and a very different Danny. And it was such a treat to write them from that perspective. I mean, I have talked about this part before, but Jim obviously was based on me, and Danny was based on my older son, David, who is now in his 30s. And in the writing of Clickers versus Zombies, Jim was still based on me, but Danny was now based on my younger son, who is underage, so I don't say his name publicly. I have a very different relationship with his mother than I did David's mother. And it's reflected in that novel. And I thought, what a treat it is to give these characters a different experience. And then that got me really thinking about the Rising as a whole. And I realized that we had an anniversary coming up. Now I'm gonna call on the professor again because she's better at math than I am. Mary, the Rising was published in 2003.
Right.
So 2023 will be the what anniversary? 20th anniversary of the Rising coming up. And I thought, boy, how neat would it be to do it all over again? And this was several years ago. And I started on the fall. And what I wanted to do, it is intended to be a very thick novel. It's intended to be like this, like King's the Stand, McCammon's Swan Song, some of Dan Simmons' really long books like Drood or The Terror. It's expected to be a doorstop of a book. I wanted to start with when the Rising is taking place, particularly the ending of the Rising, where Frankie and Jim and Martin flee. But if you notice at the end of that book, there are some characters left alive. At least we assume they're left alive. They're in Hellertown. Gina, for example. And in City of the Dead, it never follows up on what happened to them. And I thought, what if we start from their perspective? You know, what if we do a new Rising novel that's not about Jim, Danny, Frankie, or Martin? They don't appear in it. But we take some of those secondary characters that survived the Rising, and now it's their perspective. And we spend maybe the first 30,000 words, the first quarter of the novel, in the Rising. And then for the rest of the novel, we go past City of the Dead. We get into the territory in the Rising selected scenes, you know, with the insects, with the plant life, and finally, you know, at the end, the flaming ball that becomes Earth. What if that is the meat of the novel? What if I reboot my own zombie novel and 20 years later do with zombie novels what I did 20 years before? You know, same continuity. It's a direct sequel. It's a final novel in the series, but we're no longer focusing on The Walking Dead. Now we're focusing on all the other shit that follows that. My intent was to have it out for 2023 for the 20th anniversary. That is still my hope. Honestly, I don't know that that's going to happen, guys. I don't write as fast anymore. I have terrible arthritis, and on top of arthritis, I've lived a life of misadventure. I have beat the shit out of my body for 55 years, and I hurt all the time, and I'm slower than I used to be. And I don't type as fast. The words are still there, but I just can't get them out as fast. So I don't know that I'll have it finished. And even if I do have it finished, I don't know that we can get it published in time. You know, there's a lot of shortages in the supply chain right now, paper being one of them. and I don't know that we'll get the book out in time. But that is what inspired me to write it. It's what inspired me to return to that world again. It's a love letter to one of my favorite monsters, and it's a love letter to you, the fans. I mean, y'all equally have your favorites. For many of you, it's Ghoul. For many of you, it's Darkness on the Edge of Town. Some of you, it's The Complex, which delights me because The Complex is one of my newer novels, and I love that people aren't still saying, yeah, his best novel was his first one that he wrote in 2003. But I love that people love The Rising because it was a very personal novel for me, and I don't I'm not bummed out over its success. I know that if every book of mine didn't sell a single copy next month, I would still get some kind of royalty check for The Rising. And that's nice to know, when you got bills to pay. And it's nice to know that almost 20 years later, people are still reading that book and they're still connecting with it. But it's inarguably the favorite among fans. So I want to give you that one more time. We did a little bit in the end of the 7, spoiler for those of you who haven't read it. We returned to the world of The Rising. But I wanted to do a full novel one more time, set in that world. Before I die, before I get too old to write it, wanted to do it one more time. So that's where it came from. All right. Last question on Patreon, and then we will go to questions in the comments section. I know many of your books and characters are inspired by life experiences. When writing these stories, do you find it hard to reach into something so personal and add it to your writing? I do not find it hard, and experience has taught me that I should. If you go on here on YouTube, go to my Horror Show with Brian Keene playlist, and early on, listen to I don't remember the episode numbers, but listen to The Secret Origin of Dark Hollow, and there's one about Ghoul. I drew too much on personal experience in both of those novels and caused pain for some very real life people in my real life in doing so. It wasn't my intent to do that. So I have had to learn how to tone that down, to not get so personal. I think I do a lot better with it these days. If you've read me and Mary's latest book, Things Left Behind, which came out a few months ago, the story in there, Things Remembered, super personal for me. I was writing about the death of Dave Thomas, my co-host on the Horror Show with Brian Keene, and I was also writing about the death of J.F. Gonzalez, and I was writing about some other personal stuff too that I'm not going to talk about on this live stream. About to vaguely put it as vaguely as I can, a supposed friend of all of ours, who ended up being quite toxic, and who, when we were out of that situation, other friends of ours said, yeah, how did you guys not see this? Here's a list of things that were done behind your back. And it was really hurtful, and it was really enraging. And so some of that went into that story too. But the reader is never going to know what or who I'm talking about or any of that. Yeah, you may read it and say, oh, he's talking about Dave and Jesus, but you're not going to know what that other part is. So I like to think I've gotten better about that. But here's the thing. All writers draw from personal experience. Sometimes it's a whole big personal experience. Sometimes it's little things. But, the number one piece of advice writers are given is write what you know. And people misunderstand what that means. They think, if their day job is a welder and they're trying to write novels at night, that they should go home and write a novel about a welder. That's not necessarily what write what you know means. Write what you know is write about the human experience. Write about, we probably all know what a first kiss feels like. Or maybe a better way of putting it is we all know the anxiety before a first kiss. Are we going to have a first kiss? Is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? What's going to be like when it happens? We all know what it's like to have a puppy dog lick your face. We all know what a baby smells like. We all possibly know what it's like to have 8 kittens try to scramble up your legs like you're a cat tree. We all know what that first day of spring feels like. When you're in the car and you can finally roll the windows down for the first time that year. The human experience, that's right what you know. That's why I agree, and I do believe that representation is important, particularly for marginalized communities. And I'm you can go back and look at my career over 20 years. I've been fighting for that shit. I was on the forefront of that. Okay. But it's also equally important to remember that we also need to have a layer of representation for everyone who might pick that book up and read it. Because there are certain experiences in life that all of us, regardless of who we are or where we're from, will experience. We're all going to know what it's like to get our heart broken at some point. We're all going to know what it's like to be in love at some point. We're all going to know in this genre what it's like to be scared. Okay. And those things are where you draw on personal experience. Okay. That is what Write What You Know really is. How do you know where to end the similarities between fiction and reality? I think I kind of answered that. But if I didn't, I don't know, because I was rambling there. But if I did not answer it to your satisfaction, let me know in the next one of these, and we'll dig into that more. All right, so now let's pause. Let's go over here to the comments. Again, if you have anything else, put them in there. Hello, lots of. Okay. Joanne says, if Dallas wants to play fetch, I'm cool with it. I'm not, because it's distracting. He'll do it all night. Jim, good to see you, buddy. Jim says, Christopher Golden once told me writing is a great way to get rich and a poor way to make a living. Yeah, that's it. My favorite quote of Chris's is still, somebody asked him if he's famous. He says, it depends on what room I'm standing in. I think that's a great one. MJ, what's up, man? I was just listening to All on Me today. Still my favorite song of yours. Love that song. Today had something going on, and I really needed to hear that song. I needed its message. I love those lyrics. So good to see you here, man. Just recently watched the Blade Runner movies and had me thinking, has the cyberpunk genre ever been something you've been interested in writing? Not in writing. Love reading it. I love cyberpunk. And not just reading cyberpunk fiction. I used to play the tabletop game. I like cyberpunk themed video games. But I know my limitations as a writer. I dabble in science fiction, but if y'all have ever noticed, I don't get much into the science. Because like we said before, earlier in the podcast, I barely graduated high school. I don't know that shit. I'm clever. I'm street smart. I can explain quantum mechanics with a hillbilly's grasp of what quantum mechanics are, but I couldn't sit down with a PhD and debate the finer points of quantum mechanics. And so much of cyberpunk, we all glean on the punk part, but there's a lot of cyber and there's a lot of technology and science behind cyber, and I'm just not confident in my abilities to do that. Suggestions for films that are creepy or scary without being gory. Yeah, actually, I just put in my newsletter today. Mary and I watched one called what was it? Head count?
Head count.
That wasn't gory, right?
No.
Yeah, Head Count. I think it's exclusive on Shudder right now. Not sure about that.
Season's a good one too.
It's pretty creepy. What was it going?
Off season.
Off season, not the Catch 'em off season.
Not the Catch 'em off season.
I haven't seen Off Season, so I don't know. But Mary says Off Season is one. So maybe check that out. Although, the opinions expressed by Professor Mary San Giovanni may or may not represent the opinions of Brian Keene on this live stream. So, all right, I will give you all a second here for last questions if anybody has them. Still hoping for a werewolf novel before you hang it up. I'm still hoping for a werewolf idea. I have an idea for Marvel's Werewolf by Night. However, it would take a miracle for me to ever write for Marvel or DC Comics again at this point. I think I'm done with that, as are a lot of people. Boy, I don't think I'm allowed to talk about any of that publicly, but the idea, unfortunately, it wouldn't work in prose fiction. It's not a case where, like I did with Devil Slayer, where I filed the serial numbers off my sequel idea for Devil Slayer and turned it into a Don Bloom adventure. Wouldn't work. But when I get a werewolf idea, I will write one. It was the same with vampires. For years, people like, when are you going to write, something longer with vampires? Well, I had to wait until I got the idea, and I got the idea for With Teeth. You finally got it. When I get an idea for a werewolf, you guys will get it. I have to agree. A werewolf novel would be awesome. Well, I agree. It would. I would love to do it. There's a great Wendigo novel I read by Candace Nola, and I can't remember the title of it offhand. And again, it's upstairs. Hang on, I'm going to Google it real quick. Let me look it up here. Candace Nola. Here it is, Bishop. It is a Wendigo novel, but if you're looking for a good werewolf novel, I think this will scratch your itch. So yeah, it's Bishop by Candace Candace Nola, Nola. Let's see here. We got couldn't make it to the BNN. Don't worry. I'm gonna be in Pikesville, and where the hell am I? Richmond. Well, Pikesville is going to be closer to UMJ than Richmond is. Pikesville, Richmond, Virginia, and Mechanicsburg, PA before the end of the year. And next year, Mary and I are planning a pretty extensive tour, at least of the East Coast, possibly nationwide. Still in the very early stages. That's all I'm going to say at this point. I would say the entire East Coast from Maine to Florida is probably a definite, and probably much of the West Coast. As far as the rest of America, it's going to be pick and choose. But yeah, so that'll be coming. So thank you, everybody. Speaking of coming, thank you for coming to tonight's live stream. Thank you for continuing to support me on Patreon. I've said it before, Patreon is now my #1 monthly source of income. So your support there absolutely pays for this, pays for this, pays for this, and not just for me, but for Mary, for my son, for our cats. So seriously, you are directly paying our bills for us, and we appreciate that. We really do. So thank you, and we'll see you tomorrow on Patreon. Splintered, the Labyrinth Book 3 will continue. Also this week, have a new nonfiction piece coming up, something I'm writing for a new book by Mike Lombardo. Edward Lee and I were asked to do an introduction, and afterwards we're going to do that. Trying to think what else I've got slated for Patreon this week. Possibly a short story if I get it finished. So yeah, there'll be lots of good stuff. So thanks, and we'll see y'all next time.